What's going on YouTube? Hayden back. A lot of crazy things has happened to our economy in the past couple of days. You could say we had one catalyst which led to a chain reaction of events. US inflation hit 9.1% in June, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates again by 75 basis points, mortgage rates could hit 7%, second quarter GDP fell by 0.9%, and we have even entered a technical recession. But I guess that all depends on who you ask. So before we figure out whether or not we are in fact in a recession, we have to go over how we got to this point. We also need to figure out how to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Now, I'm pretty sure you just give it a tap, but you let me know if it actually works. This is also how YouTube and I know you want to see more videos like this. To start, a few weeks ago in July, we received our inflation data, which was 9.1%, a 4-decade high for the US economy. The main culprit for the pump in June was ironically the pump at the gas station. Gas prices were up over 60% for the year, a record high topping the national average at $5 a gallon. Not only was the pump at the gas station on the rise, electricity and natural gas prices also rose by 13.7% and 38.4% for the 12-month period ending in June. Overall, the energy prices rose by 41.6% year over year. And of course, that's not all that rose. Food prices at home were up 12.2% over the year, with eggs up 33%, butter up 21.3%, milk up 16.4%, chicken up 18.6%, and coffee up 15.8%. Shelter costs were even up 5.6%, which refers to rent and homes. With inflation clearly out of control, the Fed once again needed to raise interest rates, this time by another 75 basis points. This is also the first time in the modern history of the central bank that it has had 2 rate increases of 75 points back to back. Well, Hayden, what does raising interest rates actually do to the economy? That's a great question. Now, the purpose of raising these interest rates are to slow down consumer spending by making it harder for people and businesses to borrow money. This will indirectly cause businesses to start laying off employees, which we're already seeing, in order to cut back on spending, as well as cause the economy to potentially enter a recession. Hopefully by now you can see how things are leading up. Besides layoffs, borrowing costs will be higher. At one point in 2021, interest rates for business loans fell below 4%. Now the average small business loan is on its way to as high as 8%. Bank lending requirements are tightening and will only get harder, and the reason for this is that banks clearly get worried that lendees, or people that borrow, won't be able to afford the payments as easily. So in reaction, they make it harder to borrow, lowering their chances of missed or late payments. Now, SBA loans, or small business private loans, will also get more attention, and they will start to see their variable interest rates go up. When the banks aren't lending, SBA loans will usually see more activity, and SBA loans are typically easier to get than a loan from the bank. However, they do have higher variable interest payments. But besides small business loans, mortgage rates also get hit hard when the feds raise rates. The average rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage have already surged to as high as 5.81% in late June. That's before this most recent rate hike. Now, experts are forecasting that the 30-year fixed mortgage rate will vary from just above 5% to as high as 7% by the end of 2022. And this brings us to our most anticipated news, second quarter GDP. Real GDP is one of the most important topics in macroeconomics. Its role is to measure the average level of national income adjusted for inflation. There are a few things that would cause GDP to decline, which we'll go over, but typically any reduction in customer spending will cause a decrease in GDP. Now, you would think we would have seen this happen already with the feds raising rates, but since people were finally allowed to travel and go out of their homes, consumer spending is through the roof. More so now than ever before, since the feds dumped tons of freshly printed money into the economy. The feds in turn need to keep raising interest rates until consumer spending slows. But besides consumer spending, raising interest rates, government spending reductions, and environmental factors can all lower GDP, and as we know, we have seen all of these be affected. As I have stated before, when interest rates go up, so does the cost of borrowing money. Companies that sell high-end goods, such as cars or designer products, are particularly vulnerable to rising interest rates. Most customers typically need to borrow money to purchase these products. Now, they will either postpone their plans or choose cheaper options. We have also seen the feds cut back on bond buying, as well as begin to reduce their balance sheet. In other words, they are starting to remove money from the economy or remove it from circulation. Lastly, the availability of natural resources will impact the real GDP. GDP. And with oil becoming extremely difficult to obtain in the US, the lower the GDP will fall. All these factors, of course, led to our second quarter GDP falling 0.9%. If you have taken even one economics class, you would know that the technical definition of a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth in the GDP. That means by textbook definition, the US is in a recession. However, recently, the White House decided to put out a statement saying that even with second quarter GDP growth negative, it doesn't mean the economy is in a recession. The White House strongly believes this because there are other sectors of our economy doing well, like consumer spending and unemployment. The White House says, and I quote, "The variables the committee typically tracks includes real personal income minus government transfers, employment, various forms of real consumer spending, and industrial production. Notably, there are no fixed rules or thresholds that trigger a determination of decline." They also say that even though the unemployment rate is not on the committee's list, the fact that it has held at a historically low 3.6% in the past 4 months also has bearing on the recession question. So depending on who you want to believe, this downturn in our economy was really only a matter of time. When over 40% of the money in circulation was printed after 2020, you can't seriously believe there won't be any repercussions, especially when the money was only used for temporary relief. The real, actual economical problems our economy had and still currently have not been resolved. And our supply chain is still way out of whack. And even though unemployment is low and employment is moving higher, we still don't have the workforce we had before the pandemic. The problem with the White House saying we're not in a recession is almost all their indicators saying otherwise. Personal income is hurting even with more job opportunities, employment is still much lower than prior to the pandemic, and industrial production is clearly still hurting. Like, has the White House not seen what's going on with the car market? The only indicators they are holding on to is consumer spending, the employment going up, and the unemployment rate going down. But as I've said before, consumer spending is through the roof because the government dumped trillions of dollars into the economy and just lifted the lockdowns. So of course we would still have artificially high consumer spending and employment. And using the unemployment rate as an indicator for a recession is just really misleading. Just because there are less people on unemployment doesn't mean we are in good standing. Unemployment doesn't account for workers who have given up actively seeking a job. They're not counted in the unemployment rates. And freelancers and gig workers like me, who recently lost clients, are also not to be counted as unemployed. And the rate doesn't specify whether workers are employed or on a part-time basis or a full-time one. Unemployment benefits also don't last forever, and you eventually will get kicked off. And if you no longer fit the status of unemployed, you are also removed from the labor force. This alone leaves out a ton of relevant people. Now, according to the November 2020 data, nearly 6.8 million Americans who said they want a job but don't have one aren't considered a part of the labor force. This caused only 10.7 million Americans to be classified as unemployed. This means that 39% of people who aren't working aren't part of the labor force. And when you include these people, the unemployment rate jumps quite a lot, proving how skewed the unemployment rate can really be. So what you can learn is to never focus on the unemployment rate as a true economic indicator. The numbers are grossly understated due to undercounting and possible manipulation. Most, if not all, the people who lose their unemployment benefits this year in 2022 will fall out of the labor force, which will of course lower the unemployment rate, making it appear to the White House as if the economy is doing better. However, if you look at our employment population ratio, you can see we had 61% of the population employed before the pandemic. And even though unemployment is nearing the same as it was then, we are only at 59.9%, which means we are still down by 1%. Now, I know that may not sound like a lot, but during the peak in the pandemic of 2020, we fell to 51%, making our biggest drop on record only 10%, and you can see how catastrophic that was to our economy. So yes, 1% makes a big difference in such a small time period, especially if we don't know how many people came back only part-time or are currently full-time employees. Now, since GDP isn't forward-thinking, this means we have been in a recession since January 1st. This doesn't mean we just entered one, which is good news. Surprisingly to some, recessions aren't uncommon. Recessions generally do not last very long either, and they're actually necessary for economic expansion. Now, according to Capital Group's analysis of 10 cycles since 1950, the average length of a recession is only 11 months, although they have ranged from 8 to 18 months over the period of analysis. Now, this means we could be more than halfway through this current recession. There has also been 11 recessions since 1948, averaging out to about one recession every 6 years, which means we were long overdue for another recession, since the last one was 14 years ago, between 2008 and 2009, if you exclude the pandemic in 2020. All in all though, I think we are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We are finally starting to see strong job gains, housing is finally starting to drop, gas has finally started to fall, and the S&P 500 has finally started a rebound from its bottom in June, almost 14% to be exact. But the thing I'm most excited for is the expansion this recession will bring to our economy. After almost every recession is followed by expansion, which can last on average around 67 months. And that's not too bad when you consider a recession only lasts 11 months. The best part is the S&P 500 usually returns 117% on average during expansion, while only 3% during a recession, which honestly still isn't that bad. At least you're not down money. Now, before I let you go, check out this chart that I found. In recent times, our expansion phases have lasted much longer than it did in the mid-90s. In 1987, the S&P 500 fell 33% over 3 months, but rallied 580% for 12.3 years. In 2003, we fell 33% over 9 months and rallied 100% over 5 years. And lastly, in 08 and 09, we fell 51% over a year, but rallied 400% over the next 11 years. So all I'm saying is we'll make it through this recession, and before you know it, things will be back in the green, much higher than where they are now. And with that being said, make sure to smash the like button, turn on post notifications, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.